we are tapering off in the having to click the enter button. So I'm going to hop in. First and foremost, folks, welcome in. If this is your first time here, and welcome back if you've been here before. This is Focus Friday. Focus Friday is a series that we do on almost a bi-weekly basis. I don't know if any of you picked up. We take a break every 7 weeks, which does actually throw a wrench usually of me saying bi-weekly. This is one of the times where you won't see me again for 3 more weeks, for example. And basically, what this series aims to do is bring people together to chat about different things in the higher education sector, in maybe a way that's a little less formal and a little more dialogue-y. So today I have my phone ringing. That's ended. Today we have with us Graeme Owens from Boreal Education. I'll give him a second to introduce himself in just a moment, but Graham's joining me today to talk about one of, kind of the most interesting things I think that come up in these conversations bi-weekly, and that is what online and distance education looks like right now. And not just right now, but what we think it'll look like in the future. And this is one of the things that I think come up in every single one of the Focus Fridays that happen in some way, shape, or form. And I think it was maybe the first or second Focus Friday where someone said in the session, they used a statistic on how many online students study within driving distance to the institution they study at. And ever since, I have been thinking way too much about online and distance education and why some of those things are. So I'm so excited to have Graeme joining us. So, Graeme, hello, welcome. Please introduce yourself to the people.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Graeme Owens. I'm the CEO of Boreal Education. We're based in Toronto and a Canadian online program management provider, which basically means that we get to work with universities and colleges across this country to help them launch, develop, and then ultimately grow their online portfolios of programs. And really excited to be a part of the conversation and share a little bit more about some of the things that we're seeing and hopefully provide some insight on your big outstanding question from a few weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Folks, if this is your first time here, and I know there are quite a few new names on the list today, so first, again, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. But for those who don't know, how these sessions usually work is that I will spend the first 25-ish minutes asking Graeme a series of questions as written on this piece of paper. And then the second half will be open to you to ask Graeme questions. So as we round kind of the second end, please use the chat or put up your hand and come in and orally ask some questions. So to kind of get us going, Graeme, my first question for you is, what are you thinking about the current moment for online and distance education and online learning?
Like a nice big one
Okay, go
to
on.
things up. I like it. Well, obviously we're excited about it, I guess is the headline. I think there's a lot of changes happening right now that I think are sort of creating this moment for online and distance learning. The first is that I think that the learner profile, or I guess the learner itself, is changing. You're seeing a bit, certainly the traditional audiences of your traditional sort of pre-career adult for an undergraduate program, certainly still a large number of international students. But I also think that you're seeing more working professionals or more modern learners, so what maybe previously are called non-traditional learners, are looking for ways to upskill and reskill and to do it in a way that maybe hasn't been served before in this country. The second thing I think is you're seeing universities naturally, I mean, it's in every one of your blogs every week. It's what everyone's talking about is obviously there's significant financial pressure going on right now. And I think that is allowing or forcing institutions to have conversations about different audiences, different programming types, and where to make choices and investments to be able to sort of define the path that they want to go down. So you're seeing that as sort of the second pressure. And then the third one, I think, is the labor market is shifting, right? I mean, in your blogs, it's there too, but obviously it's all anywhere you sort of log on LinkedIn or read in the paper. I mean, just the labor market is changing so much. AI, automation, workforce changes, layoffs, all of those things are contributing to the need for industries and industry associations are rallying around attracting new groups. And I think that if you think about all three of those things, where the profile is changing, the institutions are needing to change, and the labor market is changing, being in a position where you can design something to address all three of those things, I think is really, really exciting.
And definitely no easy feat at the exact same time. I mean, that is a lot of unknowns on top of each other. Um, for anyone who, on a complete side note, there's a few institutions that I think we've been waiting to see what their budget looks like here at HESET. And folks, Vancouver Island University posted a balanced budget this year. That is shocking to me because their finances, I will be completely honest with you, are a little scary. But they're also having some really interesting uh transitions in their leadership. So I think they'll be a fun institution to watch over the next year in particular. Complete side note, but saw it this morning and wanted to share it. Grant, one of the things that we at HESA seen, so we do occasional surveying with partners like the Strategic Council and just different kind of thought leadership think tanks, etc., across the country. And one of the things that came up in one of our surveys with them is that the share of students who were open to taking online classes increased from about 20%, so 1 in 5, pre-pandemic, to about 35% post-pandemic. Meaningful growth, still pretty small. Um, do you think that's real growth in seeing an appetite for online learning, or are we really kind of seeing a demand for something that's maybe more flexible?
I think I think it's a little bit of both. I think when you look at the sort of pandemic, it did some good things for online learning, but it also maybe changed some people's perceptions of what that means. I think I've worked in the space for a long time. It was still a little bit of a dirty, I don't think a number of folks on the call also have, but it was a dirty word here a little bit in Canada. And I think that what COVID did do was demonstrate that online delivery was viable or was doable. The challenge is that it sort of spun up as this emergency remote teaching, and I think that a lot of folks have that perception that that is what that learning experience. So it brought the barrier down, but it also sort of created this version of what online learning is sitting on a call like this and with everyone with their camera off and sharing information. And I think that what that change that you shared highlights is that there's clearly demand interest in that level of flexibility. But I think also the reason why the number maybe isn't as high as I would have expected, or maybe what we've seen in some other areas, is just that there's still that perception that if I need to go and sit on a 3-hour Zoom or Teams call on a Wednesday afternoon, that's not the experience that I'm going for. So that need for flexibility, I think, really speaks to that. Further to that, I would also say that like the other 65 that aren't open to it, I would suspect the portion of that survey, I don't know the methodology, but I'll just speak to it, probably are thinking more about a traditional undergraduate experience, right? Where being on campus, being a part of that experience, I think is really critical and is top of mind, especially for a cohort of folks that maybe were in high school when there was e-learning and emergency remote high school teaching. So that perception, I think, is different. If you change that a little bit to someone who's a working professional, maybe they're in their 30s or 40s, they have family and work obligations, that level of flexibility and that type of online thinking can have a real value to them. So I know that I think Nicole's on this call, but CBLRA has done some great publication on this as well, speaking about sort of what those perceptions are. And I think the numbers are a little bit higher when you broaden that audience. Hi, Nicole. So it's I think that when you think about that audience, it's there may be higher interest in online and flexible type of offering as opposed to a traditional undergraduate experience, but you definitely are seeing that shift over time.
Fantastic. And I'm actually, so I did send Graham the questions in advance. I'm going to flip the order because you did kind of touch in on something. Canada's kind of trailed behind in bringing in things like online programming, especially if you look at us compared to Australia or the UK. They have slates of online programming. And it seems like in Canada, a lot of institutions are kind of just dipping their toes in it. Why is that?
It's a good question, and I know that you picked Australia and UK because obviously I think they're a good representation of us, and you see the growth in those areas. Um, I think the other part that I want to sort of point to as well is like obviously the American market. I think is a big reason why we're seeing different changes here. I think that what we've seen a lot in Canada is programs that have been created for um, programs that have been created specifically for like their immediate catchment area and sort of providing that flexibility. And maybe they don't gain as much popularity as a result of that, where it's a faculty member who has something that they're really excited about that sort of becomes this project that gets approved. They're able to get the program out there. But if they're not the ones that are telling the story and you're not building the support around it and getting that message out, they're not nearly as successful. And I think that if you look at um, those other markets, certainly Australia, certainly the UK, you can see the wrap around support. You can see the market intelligence that goes into which programs get created. And certainly you can see the same thing in the US. Obviously, they're a much more saturated market than we are. But I think that if you're not being intentional about what goes into the front end around market intelligence, and then second, putting in the mechanism for that marketing and recruitment engine, and three, providing that student support all the way through, you sort of end up in this scenario where you've the momentum of adopting online programming or online learning across a campus, either university or college, kind of goes away. So you've got sort of these false starts in a number of different places. And we would challenge, and certainly the partners that we work with, to say, think about that full experience. So when you do bring something to market, it's going to have a little bit more success. I think if you look at, UNSW, Melbourne, University of Melbourne, in Australia is great examples of building that sort of common front door of here's all of our online learning experiences from short courses to micro credentials to diplomas to degrees. They have some different governance structures there, but it's a great way, I think, to, speak to students where they are and give them multiple access points and entry points and exit points from your institution, and then to really celebrate that. So I think you see that in a lot of cases there.
Good transition into my next question. What on earth is an OPM?
Sure.
What do you do?
Um, Of course, a good question. I think also, going back to the last question, you do see a large number of OPM players in the market too. So adding that capacity certainly, I think, makes a big difference. But to put it sort of plainly, we help institution or OPM partners, I should say, help institutions build, launch, and grow their online programs. And it's done in a partnership model where the institution still owns all of the academic content, curriculum, admissions decisions, but they're bringing in a partner to help them add that capacity and basically help be that capacity builder to help them get it off the ground. And that typically looks like market research upfront, program design, marketing, recruitment, student success, or see some like will and clinical placement pieces as well. And then in some cases, it's the instructional design. A lot of institutions in Canada have a lot of strength here, but in other markets, not so much. So it's sort of providing all of that capacity depending on the program and then partnering with institutions to be able to help them do that. Obviously in those markets that you talked about, quite well defined from an OPM relationship perspective, quite new here in Canada. So what we are sort of as Boreal being sort of being the Canadian OPM provider, what we've done is taken what's worked well in Australia, taken what's worked well in the UK and in the US, but also knowing where some of those maybe, landmines to avoid. We've built that directly into our model and sort of configured it specifically for our market. And we know that there's some different components about, shared governance, size and complexity, approval mechanisms, a lot of those pieces that are all sort of built into our market that we've sort of said, let's build what a Canadian OPM needs to be to sort of service what that market would look like.
Fantastic. And I'm reading through the comments here as we kind of go through, and uh Aldo points out an interesting point that, in comparison to some different markets in the UK and Australia, there are some more complexities in the Canadian higher education landscape and our decision making, particularly in things like, how closely do we hold um, online and distance programming versus residential programming as kind of our DNA, our bread and butter, and the what we see as a quality education, quote unquote. How what are some examples, would you say, are some examples of some successful OPMs in Canada or online programs, not online programs?
Like maybe just more broadly online programs. I mean, I think that a really great there's a couple of institutions that have done this, I think, really well and have leaned into this space in a material way. Um, I guess I'll share two. Sorry if you're on the call and I've skipped you over, but UBC would be one. I think they've really invested heavily in a large instructional design team, and found some programs that are market driven so that there's clearly an identifiable audience. They're well resourced, they're well advertised. If you look at um, I guess specifically the Master of Education Technology is one program that, they do extremely well in. So I'd say they're a really good example. Number two would be Waterloo. I think that they also have a great portfolio of programs that are a little bit more specifically niche and serve very clear audiences, which to me is a signal that they've done their homework on the market intelligence piece, and then are putting in the marketing, recruitment, and support mechanisms for that working professional. So they're still running the same programs on campus, but they're also offering online streams of that. I think that that's something that's really meaningful and exciting. I also think that you're seeing more institutions like the University of New Brunswick who are leaning more heavily into, having that common front door of UMB Online as a digital campus to bring in existing programming, but also to use that as a platform that students can come to find additional programs as well. So there's a lot of, I think, really good ones here. But I think ultimately the biggest constraint that we face in Canada is that we're not the only players that are advertising in our market. And if you look at whether that's foreign universities and whether those are, UK, Australia or American, they see our audience and they see that it's not typically well advertised to, and they spend a lot of money advertising to those students and attracting those students there. So you see definitely a larger interest in private institutions in Canada, private institution networks, and then also you're seeing sort of these foreign players that are coming in and saying, well, the audiences are looking for this type of information, this type of knowledge, types of programs. We want to make sure that we're there to serve them. So I can see why they've done that as well.
I want to stay kind of on a similar theme. And Darren asked a great question in the chat that we're going to come back to. But staying on kind of a similar theme at this moment, when institutions, you go through traditional program design, your in-person programming, you usually run it through whatever your committee on academic programming is, you run it up to your Senate, you run it over to your quality assurance board. Maybe it sits there for a while. Maybe it goes through smoothly. The process ranges anywhere from like 6 months to 2 years, depending on what institution you're at. What does that look like in an online format? Is it the same? Is the quality assurance the same? Is kind of the process like what's the difference? Is there any?
Sure. I love that explanation of a program development process. I'm sure that all of the institutional planning teams are like, that's how we should describe it to everyone. Yeah, just run it over to quality council and they'll say yes to it. So I think I would spin the question a little bit to say, what do learners want? Right. And I think that there's two different buckets here. The first is that they want programming that is responsive to what they need immediately and what they need in the workforce. And to your point, if the process takes 2 years, 3 years, which is common, that's not responsive. So I think that you definitely need to offer programming that is responsive, and there's the right place for that. And I think there's some great providers of short course, micro credential, non-credit offerings for that audience because you need that built in. There's also some programs I think that, or some learners, I should say, that are looking for that, in the case of university programs, Senate backed, or sort of built through the academic engine of the institution and going through the province or the region, depending on your area, for approval. And what I would say is that you should not ignore that audience, right? Just because it's hard and just because your very clearly articulated process is complex. It's about how do you add capacity to that process and make sure that when you're bringing programs through that the juice is worth the squeeze and that it's designed with sustainability in mind. So I think in a lot of cases, what ends up happening is there's a lot of discussion in the early stages and a lot of decisions that need to get made, but they happen at each of those gates. So when we work with our partners, we try to bring a lot of that evidence up front, build that business case alongside them with real market intelligence and say, look, this isn't as we try to sort of set the floor of this is the level of risk that you could expect, on a given program. And this is why we think this is one that you'd want to go and pursue. And what that I think does is galvanize those teams to co-create that program with you so that at each of those steps, there's buy-in, it's comprehensive, and you're not trying to build the plane to get to the Senate and then the Quality Council. You're doing it in a way that allows for that process to make sense. And yes, there's still, QA for a reason, and external reviews and proper governance is a very important part of our process and something that I think is a structural advantage in Canada. But it's how do you bring teams together, make it a priority, maybe lean on an outside partner to help add capacity on the evidence building. But that's a process that I think allows for you to create programming that is still responsive. It's just responsive in a way that's a little bit more material. But I'll give you an example, like a path to licensure program, like a Master of Social Work or a counseling psychology program. Those take the governance is essential there because you're talking about graduates who have to be able to achieve those learning outcomes. So you have to go through all of the requisite internal processes and then external ones as well. But ultimately, if you can check all those boxes, you've created a product that really is in demand from the learner, and shying away from that, I think, is not serving your institution or serving the learner.
What would you say is the most common and repeated mistakes that you see institutions make when doing online and distance education?
It's a good one. And I worked at LinkedIn before, sort of getting into this space in my previous company and then now at Boreal. But so ran the higher education advertising business there and got to see firsthand all of the different marketing and advertising teams. Great people, very smart at what they do, but the budgets just aren't nearly as big as some of those other players. So I would say the biggest challenge that we do here is we don't market our programs. And I think that the misconception, to answer your question properly, is that programs don't need marketing, right? It's not a build it and they will come. You can't just hang a shingle and put it on your application or your provincial application center and hope that students find it. Like a 40-year-old professional is not searching through university websites to see which programs that are going to be interested to them. You have to get that program in front of them. So we talk a lot about demand generation as a tactic. So how do you leverage LinkedIn, Facebook, Reddit, and then obviously make sure you have your additional channels as well to get in front of that group, right? Your domestic programs, you have that sort of guidance council, you have an entire team around university fairs and college fairs to attract that group. You have a whole ecosystem designed for international students to come in and learn more about your institution and understand your brand. In for online programs or for working professional programs, you have to have that same ecosystem and structure. And if you're not getting the program in front of them, they just don't know that that exists. And again, that's why I think you see such high matriculation from the American players here, from Australian players and others that have come in, because they're providing that demand generation engine. And a student is going to say, oh, I didn't even know that program existed. I didn't know that I could get my Master of Data Science online, or I didn't know that I could get I would take my college diploma and be able to get a university degree out of it, um, or sorry, a bachelor's degree out of it. If you don't know that those pathways exist and you don't have a team behind to be able to explain it, I think it's sort of a bit of a misconception. So we see that all the time where, hey, we put this program up and then we only got 5 or 6 students to get a sense at the program. And my first question is always, how much advertising did you put behind it and what was the recruitment channel that you built out? And in a lot of cases, those don't exist. So it's a bit of an unfortunate misconception, but I think one that there's enough evidence now of other players doing it well that you can usually work with institutions to think more critically about how to get these programs that are rigorous, valuable, and real, and will create a meaningful change in their lives in front of the people who need them.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, because one of the things that, has also been kind of a fun up and coming topic in the sector has been transnational education. And I feel like the number one thing that I say in transnational education is like, how does your marketing in the country work? Like in your own country work? How do you explain your programs locally? Like, how will you explain your programs in a completely different country where like we don't just know that you know, Queens is a fantastic undergraduate experience, or like Waterloo is great for co op. How do you actually explain that in other countries? So I think that's um, a really interesting train of thought, even kind of in that domestic market too. My last question for you, sorry, go ahead, Grim.
I was just gonna say, in your sort of preamble question around why is there the geographic constraint, I really think maybe that was your last question and I'm stealing it from you, but I think that really speaks to that point, right? Which is that you end up with folks that are familiar with your brand, maybe still live in that community or an alum of that institution who then just say, oh, well, they maybe are perusing the website for that information, or they've heard of someone else in their immediate community. But if you're not putting that program in front of them, I think that's why you see such high regionalization in that, in Canada in particular, but anyways, that's the point I want to make. If you're going to ask that question at the end, I'll say more.
Great, that was the question. So please continue.
I can tell by your face, so I just
You're like, oof.
okay.
Let's try to think of a new question while you were answering.
I think the last point I was just going to make there is when you compare it with the other markets where I think a lot of that thinking or research comes from, it comes down to saturation. And I think if you look at the US in particular, from a saturation point, I was watching a session similar to this one with some American institutions the other day, and they said there are more online MBAs in America than there are Costco's. And I was stunned by that. And it's just such a great representation, I think, of how saturated that market has become. And I think that when you are that saturated, you end up with a product that is not differentiated to a learner. So if there's that many online MBAs, how could you possibly choose them? So you choose the brand that you know, or you choose the brand that employers know. Return on education that you're going to be able to get. So what you do find is you're not seeing that same level of advertising on top of it.
Hmm. Very interesting indeed. Folks, go and open the floor to you for questions, comments. I see some good conversation happening in the chat, and I would please invite you all to kind of bring some discussion up here. And seeing some things on, different things like intellectual property and the big one that we all talk about. What does assessment look like in online learning? But I want to pick up on Darren's kind of earlier comment. Do the UK and Australia govern their higher ed sectors at the national level? Could one of the challenges here be that higher education is more provincial? So to go to kind of the first part of that, they are governed at a national level. Australia a little bit less so in comparison. But Australia has the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, which does kind of plan a uh, nationwide plan and foundation for tertiary education across the sector. So that's their colleges, their TVETs, their universities, postgraduate. And the UK is pretty well nationally mandated. And I think one of the things about that is that there's just nationwide planning. Um, but that still doesn't really, in my opinion, kind of explain why they're so ahead. Um, so Graham, to flip this question to you in a way, like, are there regional differences in Canada and are there, I don't want to say governments, are there governments in Canada that are kind of focusing more on online education as a priority?
Yeah, good question. That wasn't how I thought you were going to shape the question, so I'm just going to change my answer in my head. My answer is going to be the Maritimes. So I think if you look at what MPHEC has done in the last, um, I guess, 2 or 3 years, they've sort of developed this framework for what they want online programs to look like, and I love that because what it's done is it's each institution has to come up with their own flavor of what that framework fits into their own governance structures and CBAs and things like that. But what it's allowed for is sort of these best practices that are followed and common definitions of what everything means so that when you're promoting your programs, learners can understand what that looks like. But it's also built in sound instructional design as one of the principles, which I think is really smart, adequate student support for a unique audience, which is something we talk about all the time. So to see that level of leadership from your region to say, look, we want all of our institutions to think about this. And then what they've done, which I think is quite smart, is once you've got that framework adopted at your institution, it actually accelerates the program development process, provided you can demonstrate that you're meeting all of these different framework criteria. So I think that's it's an acknowledgement of we need to do something about it. We need to do it right. And we can support all of our institutions in doing that, but also but not mandating saying you have to do more of this. Just if you're going to do it, here's the path to do it. And I think that type of leadership is really smart.
The Maritimes, is that then through MPHEC?
Correct.
Interesting. I have not heard of that actually. So that is a cool new piece of knowledge. Gonna pick up on David's question in the chat here. David just spent 2 days at CreditX 2026, hosted at VCC in Vancouver. I love VCC. Everyone I chat with at VCC is so nice and just very welcoming, and I like them a lot. That's my comments on VCC. How do you see the micro-credential market, and what challenges and opportunities do institutions face in building capacity to develop flexible, short-cycle credentials that meet government and industry needs while also laddering into traditional credentials?
I think
Solve all the
I
problems.
think that's the challenge, right? I think it's how do you solve all of those? And I think there hasn't been a clear answer to that necessarily. I think there's a lot of institutions that are leading from the frontier and thinking about not only what's a common framework and understanding so the learners can understand, but also what employers can understand. And I think that to me is the biggest gap. And when we talk to institutions about this type of programming, that employer piece is really at the front of it when you break it down from a financial sustainability perspective. So in order for the program to be offered, you have to create something that learners want. Well, there's a lot of programs offered by a lot of not only post-secondary players, but also other players that, are on some of the hot topics that are maybe, the demand already exists for those. So if not, you have to advertise those programs, like I mentioned earlier. If you advertise those programs, that comes with a cost. And that cost either needs to be born out of scale, so having multiple students in significant number of students in order to make that work. And there's questions about whether or not that's the right learning experience. Or you can't advertise, and then you can, but then that cost has to be passed on to the student. And I think that if that is the way you have to go, the employer needs to be a part of the conversation, because it's one thing to offer a $900 course on a specific topic that a student says, the juice is worth the squeeze, that skill is valuable to me, it's from a credible institution, and I want to leverage that in my career. That's helpful. But if the cost is starting to creep higher and higher, that return education question, it becomes higher in the brain, I think. And you end up with those programs or those offerings needing to have recognition in the marketplace by employers in order for them to be valuable. And I think that that's the disconnect is if it's not a recognized program type that an employer is going to know, they may not assign the same value, which means that you may not have the same level of pricing power. And I know that that's not necessarily how you have to think about these, but if they're not being funded through other initiatives, they have to be funded either in a financially sustainable way or by creating offerings that are sort of configured and custom to specific employers. So I think that's the big constraint in the micro-credential community in Canada. I'm not an expert in it, so I know there's a lot of really smart people on this call. I hope I didn't butcher it too much. But I think to get at the root of David's question, what we try to talk to institutions about isn't about laddering and more about nesting. So sort of if you're going to go through the process of all the way to a specific program type, a diploma, a degree, a master's degree, whatever it's going to be, what are all of the nested credentials that you can offer in that? And I think to your point, having short cycle or even short courses as a part of that experience, that is really valuable, not only as an entry point, meaning I'm just going to come and take 2 or 3 courses at a time. And maybe my employer matches something like that, or that's what I can commit to right now. And then they have something in their hands, whether it's a certificate or a micro program, but it's something that's sort of a Senate recognized credential. But it also creates an exit path. So it might be someone who says, hey, look, I'm 6 courses into a 10-course program. If I stick around for one more, that's going to get me a graduate diploma, and that's going to allow me to go and experience what I want to experience. So our whole sort of, when we think about program design, is build those nested credentials in to create more students in the program and to have that retention vehicle and give students the same offerings, but you're going through the motion of getting the program approved in the first place. Do it all at the same time because it's the same paperwork, it's the same conversations, and that allows you to be a little bit more responsive. The other half of that is just making sure that when you're designing your programs, you're allowing for the flexibility of having different courses involved. And that allows you to be a little bit more responsive at the course level rather than being at the program level.
I want to pick up on something that Lena put in the chat earlier. Lena said dropping these ideas into the conversation for further conversation. Hello, it's further conversation time. What trends are we seeing in asynchronous versus synchronous design in online programming? I feel like, Graeme, you're probably the person who pays the most attention to the online programs that are starting up in Canada. What's the trend? Are they mostly synchronous, asynchronous? Fun.
It's a great question. And now I feel really self-conscious about my micro-credentials answer, knowing that Lena was obviously listening to that the whole time. So hopefully I didn't do it too bad of justice there. But so I think from there, thank you for that. Thank you for the heart. That's great. So the asynchronous and synchronous is, in my view, a spectrum. And I think that you've got sort of the such vague terms, and everyone has a different definition of what all of those look like. And I know CDLRA has put some nice definitions around it, but whether you're a learner, a faculty member, an administrator, outside, whatever that looks like, everyone has a different definition of what that means. And I think in some cases, asynchronous to some means open access. I can complete a course as fast or as slow as I would like. I can jump in at any time, and I can complete it as fast. I can finish it whenever I want to. And then on the other side of the spectrum, other people think that synchronous means I have to be in a live classroom for a 3-hour lecture at 2:00 on a Wednesday, and that's not you would typically. Neither of those, I think, are great learning experiences. Right? I think that what you hear from learners and what we see when we work with our partners, but also survey our students. You do hear that the number one piece of feedback, good or bad, is what was the level of interaction that you had with faculty and what was the level of interaction you have with students. When there's very little, the overall satisfaction of the course is very low. When there's a lot, it's the opposite. Obviously, there's, they love it. So when we think about not only program design, how do you think about having a cohesive student experience where you're creating interactive moments where you can collaborate with your classmates, collaborate with your faculty members, You don't necessarily have to sit for a lecture. You can do that through technology-enabled solutions like your good LMS, like building highly produced multimedia courses in there. But we talk a lot more about what are those interactive moments where you're getting that sufficient interaction with your faculty members to create more of a high value experience for them. And it's something we try to do at the program level so that you can think about if we're going to have moments where we want students to come together, we're being conscious of time zones, different work arrangements. So you can tell students in advance, hey, look, there's going to be a group project in a lot of these courses, and it typically follows this type of cadence. So we would talk about that at the program level. And then at the course level is how do you make sure that those individual course learning objectives are coming out and what different types of technology can you leverage to still get those across? And in some cases, that might be leaning on more um, sort of multimedia driven living in an LMS type experience. And in other cases, you might have more of those interactive moments, either with your peers or with a classmate. So we talk a lot more about sort of that as a direction, because I think that, which I'm sure is probably the next question you're going to ask, but a big portion, I think, where a lot of questions around, bringing AI into the classroom or into the learning experience on some of those more, open access, sort of open courses, you can see that speed start to become attractive for a learner because they have some of these tools in their back pocket. So I think it's how do you design a course and a program knowing that those are out there? And we really advocate for term-based courses that build in a lot of that interactive moments and have that sort of scaffolded approach as you progress through a given term.
Gonna pick up on one of the words that you used there, and that is technologies. What have you been hearing on agentic AI and online learning? There's some conversation about it in the chat already. I think the conversation used to be student cheating, went into a little bit about student choosing AI, and now we're fully at what if we have educational agents doing courses? Is that resulting in changes in how institutions, I'll pick that up to institutions, on how institutions are approaching online programming? Or is it not really the conversation yet?
I think it's a huge part of it, right? And I think going back to our shared governance structure, right? The great illustration map that you gave for us. At each of those stages, everyone's asking the same question, right? How do we make sure that we're building academic integrity into this? And especially if we're building something for 6, 9, 12 months from now, how do we make sure that we built that in now so that, when the world's changing, we have those safeguards in place? And it's obviously disrupting everything, not only in higher ed, but I think, the workforce in general. So I would say the first part of it in program design to your question is, I think that AI is not limited to STEM programs anymore. Like it's not just going to be built into your data science offerings or your business courses. It's in everything, right? You're seeing it in health informatics. You're seeing it in communications programs. So it's definitely been a big shift where if you're building something now, students are seeking this out either because their fields are being disrupted by AI and they want to make sure they have that skill set, or they are increasingly reliant on it in their work and they want to make sure that they're getting that complementary experience. So that's definitely a big part of program design. I think from an overall sort of assessment method or how you're thinking about building it into your program, we could talk about this for a long time. And just a disclaimer, I'm not an instructional designer. We have an amazing team that does all of that work for us. So I won't pretend like I can speak very credibly to assessment design. But when we do think about it, we talk a lot more about when you're looking at a working professional, they are typically coming in because they're eager to learn. Right? It's a little bit different from that undergraduate experience. Not saying that all undergraduate students are thinking that way, but it is something where you do see that they're coming for a reason, right? They're taking time out of their work and family life to study. They want that information, right? So I think starting from first principles that is the audience that you're working with, I think is really important. The second thing is that they're clearly using AI in their day-to-day work. So pretending that they're not, I don't think helps anyone. So how do you build AI directly into it and create parameters for when that's permitted, when it isn't, and having disclosures around how you used it and passing on that human judgment piece. So we talk a little bit more about how can you build that in. The next area is then when you're talking about assessment, how do you have something that progresses over time, allows for more reflection when you're bringing it into your work? That sort of allows for that type of reflection. So one of the benefits of having a working professional audience is that you actually have real life application that you can bring right into that conversation. So we definitely see that, using not just in the document creation assessment methods, but more how can you build in more reflection? There's no silver bullet. If someone's figured this out, please challenge me on it or send me an email because we'd love to hear about it. But I do think that we're at this interesting inflection point when you're thinking about designing new programs and new courses. You can know that it's out there and know that people are using it and start from that basis rather than pretending that it's not there.
Also, to pick up on Graham's point there, if you have figured it out, you should publish that because I think every single institution is asking the exact same question in every single program, and I'm pretty sure that you could probably sell that answer for a few dollars to
We would
get rid
we
of your
would
student
we,
debt.
we would buy it if it was there.
Yeah, you pay off your student debt really quick. I think we hit the end of the questions in the chat, and if I missed any, please don't hesitate. Maybe we have 10 more minutes, so let's take another one or two if you have them. But Graham, I think is the most underestimated value of online and distance education.
I think that it's about serving an audience that isn't being served today. And I think that from an institutional perspective, you can create programming that is, I think a lot of people on this call would argue that we have some world-class institutions, a lot of them in this country, a fantastic education system. It's just not being democratized or accessible for students typically. And I think that online learning and online programming as a vehicle to deliver that education in front of those learners is something that I get really excited about. And I think what our team gets out of bed for every single day. And I think when you look at, again, the Australian, UK, US institutions that are coming and playing here, they're also delivering great educational experiences. But I think that that just goes to show the hunger and the appetite for learners here. And if our world-class institutions were able to get in front of that audience with a rigorous academic experience that is designed for working professionals, that provides the support that they need, to me, that's something that the learners are going to get really excited about. And it goes back to the very first thing that you asked me about this moment, right? The learner profile is changing. They're already going to other programs. Let's make sure we get in front of them. It solves that institutional constraint of we need to create programs that are financially sustainable. Well, if you know there's a market there and you can build a business case, it means you can add resources rather than take them away. And then the third one is like in this moment in Canada right now, like we have this, we're building for what this next phase of our country is going to look like. And in the defense industrial strategy, you're seeing it in other workforce areas that are saying we need more growth in energy. We need more growth in critical minerals. We need more growth in STEM. We need more growth in AI. Those are fields that we need to meet the moment on. And if Canadian institutions don't, others will. And I think that that's where really the moment that we get excited.
I was going to ask you what I think is an unfair question. I'm going to ask it anyways, and I recognize it's unfair, and let me caveat with the fact that it's an unfair question. As someone who watches the online distance education landscape in Canada and throughout the world, what is the biggest area of development right now for online and distance programs? What's the hot thing that people are thinking about?
Like what's the field of study or what's the program that are areas of interest? Oh, a good question. You are going to put me on the spot. So
Yep.
I will say we work with some amazing partners here in Canada that we obviously we're very fortunate to be able to partner with those institutions. So we do have a nice pipeline of programs that we're socializing. I would say that there's sort of two major buckets that I think, based on what I was just talking about, of like where we think, to go back to your initial hockey analogy to open the call, like where the puck is going. Yeah, I think you're seeing certainly in the STEM fields, right? Naturally, right? I think a lot of folks that are looking to upscale in those areas or to change industries entirely. So those career advancers or those career switchers, someone who says, look, I've got a very common example. I have an undergraduate degree in computer science and I can't get an entry level job. Well, I want to continue to work, but now I'm going to go and double down into an MDS, like a Master of Data Science. I want the business application of that. So a Master of Management and Master of Management Analytics or a Master of Business Analytics. You're certainly seeing those areas as big growth ones. So I definitely say in that space, sort of in that, technical skills is one. Number two is sort of more on the leadership lens. So I've got my traditional undergraduate experience, whether that's a diploma or a bachelor's degree. And now I'm a domain expert, but I never went for that sort of like managerial or leadership type training. So you see, you know, um, uh, uh, like education leadership programs, nursing leadership programs, engineering management programs. I think you're starting to say this isn't for practitioners to be better practitioners. It's for practitioners who want to be leaders and need that broader governance, ethics, law, management, organizational design, community development type skill set to complement what they're looking for. And then the last one that I would say that I know there's a couple institutions that are doing this here, but if you look at the US market or in other places, it's on health and community programs. So if you think about, in the US, massive growth area is still in the clinical nursing programs. So how do you make sure that taking the important work that happens from a theoretical and didactic content perspective, still you can use technology to bring that into an online format. And then from a distance perspective, how do you make sure that you have adequate instruction at the simulation level? And then also ensuring you're getting your clinical placements in your home community. That's true for nursing and is maybe the easiest to explain answer. But if you extrapolate that out to areas like counseling, psychology, social work, public health, those are all areas where there's a large need and a learner pool that wants to go and do that, but they're not in a position to quit their job and go and pursue that and move to a campus to go and take those programs. And I think that the institutions that can say, we acknowledge that this is a viable path forward, right? We're going to work with our regulatory body on a path to licensure to make sure that all of that is appropriate. And then create a pathway for them to go and achieve that. And ultimately just comes down to capacity. How do you support those students? How do you support those clinical placement sites? And ensure that there's an experience that is going to get the learner to the outcomes that they need in order to get towards that path to licensure. So obviously we're talking to all of our institutions about all of those programs, but I would say those are kind of the three major areas that we're seeing interest. And when we look at the market and look at the market data, that's where we see the most potential.
And the reason that I said that's an unfair question is because, someone here might leave with wow, look, here's the hot takes that
That would be great. We want more activity in our market. So that,
but let me caveat there. Do your research first, folks. Just because, something works for one institution or works generally doesn't mean it'll work for your institution or your specific needs. And so general reminder to do your research. There's one last question in here that is quite broad. And Graeme, you get 1 minute to answer it.
got it.
What's EDI like in online and distance education?
Oh, a great question. I think there's a lot. How do I answer that in 1 minute? I think that what online learning does very well is it creates access for all different learner types. And I think that the I in EDI, meaning from an inclusivity perspective, how do you bring more students into the fold? So I think it's about designing programs for folks that maybe don't live in those areas. The second part of it, I think, is on the student support side. And if you are going to provide pre-enrollment support, post-enrollment support for students, you need to ensure that the folks that are having those conversations represent the communities that they're serving. And that's a big part of the support that we provide, something that we certainly advocate for in all of our modeling to make sure that when students are asking your institution about online programming, that there's someone on the other side that understands their specific use case. The last bucket I would just say is when you're designing these programs, and every instructional design team in the country does a very good job of this, but obviously making sure that you're mapping towards all of the different accessibility standards so that you don't create this great experience, have someone show up, and then they can't actually benefit from the instructional tools that are there. So a lot more to unpack on the topic, but I do think that creating an environment where all learners can succeed, providing the supports for them along the way, and to give them a great learning experience, I think is the first step there.
Fantastic, Graham. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the questions, everyone. It was great.
Folks, we are down to 3 Focus Fridays left. 3. We did a full year worth of Focus Fridays, and there are 3 left. One of the things that has come up even in this conversation is IP. Let me say honestly, I cannot run an hour session on IP. But if you would like to come host an hour session on IP with me, I more than invite you to do that. But I certainly am not qualified to even ask 8 questions on intellectual property. So if that is of interest to you, please reach out to me at tmcclennan@higherstrategy.com. Like I said, there's 3 of these left. Then we're out for the year. If there's any extra topics that you want to talk about, feel free to reach out. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Friday.